Time for the fifth in these series of videos showing you exactly what's needed to get a grade 9 for GCSE English Literature when writing about Great Expectations. This time let's look at class, stay tuned and watch Schofield on Shakespeare.
Before exploring class, let's just recap the key ideas and quotations from the previous 4 videos. First up, the relationship between Pip and Magwitch. Referring to the extract, I point to Pip's rising terror, trembling and faltering as he begins to realise that Magwitch may actually be his benefactor. As the truth dawns, his heart beats like a heavy hammer of disordered action and he looks wildly. No wonder he is scared, given that during their previous meeting at the beginning of the novel, Magwitch suggested that his heart and liver might be torn out, roasted and eaten if he didn't do as he was told. But later in the novel, Pip grows to first pity and then love Magwitch. His repugnance begins to melt away. He recognises that he was simply a mere hunted, wounded, shackled creature. Given that he has dedicated so many years to him, it is unsurprising that eventually Pip felt affectionately, gratefully and generously towards Magwitch. In the next video, we explore the presentation of Miss Havisham. The extract contained the first ever conflict between Miss Havisham and Estella. Estella pulled away from Miss Havisham, causing the latter to cry out, "Speak the truth, you ingrate! You are tired of me!" She then melodramatically remembered the time she took this ungrateful bosom into her heart and home, at a time when her wretched breast was first bleeding from its stabs. Earlier in the novel, Miss Havisham looks at Pip in a strange way and tells him pseudo-proudly about her broken heart while smiling. But towards the end she wants to make a degree of amends and therefore agrees to Pip's plan to fund Herbert's finally promising career prospects. In the third video we explore the presentation of love. In the extract, Pip inexplicably tells Estella and Miss Havisham just how much he has loved and continues to love the former in spite of her pending marriage to posh brute Bentley Drummle. He tells her, "You have been in every line I have ever read since I first came here, the rough common boy, whose poor heart you wounded even then." Estella thinks quite rightly that this is ridiculous, and so looks at him with incredulous wonder. But Pip's words, poor chap, are gashing like blood from an inward wound. Meanwhile in the past, Miss Havisham, again inexplicably, passionately loved and perfectly idolised posh Chancellor Compeyson. Consequently, she instructed Estella to break Pip's heart and that of as many men as possible. Also relating to love, Biddy is overjoyed to marry Joe and experiences a burst of happiness. Miss Skiffins is more restrained after marrying Wenmick, but submits to be embraced as a cello might have done. But perhaps Dickens celebrates non-romantic love far more, hence Pip's tears of triumph seeing Herbert return to find out that apparently his looking about him for so long has finally paid off. Next up, the presentation of relationships between parental figures and children. The extract contains Mrs. Pocket being aristocratically useless and dangerous. As her children appear, she rather thought she'd had the pleasure of inspecting them before, but didn't quite know what to make of them. For her, they ought to have been nobles. When given her own baby, it ends up, hopefully not completely literally, with a prodigious concussion. And later the same baby, after playing with a nutcracker, finds its young brains imperilled. But Mrs. Pocket is not keen at being told what to do, or having her authority challenged. When well-meaning dear Jane tries to intervene, she gets called a naughty child, and is instructed to go and sit down. Pip's sister is regularly abusive, but it is amusing the way he interprets the phrase that she has brought him up by hand. As a parental figure, she can't be bothered to answer questions from the impertinent, ungrateful young, hence her appalling ending to an explanation about the type of people put into prison ships. They begin by asking questions. But there is the positive portrayal of Joe, Pip's father figure, his love for him, as seen in the imagery about his pipe and the smoke floating like a blessing, pervading the air we shared together. I talked endlessly about the mark schemes in the previous videos. Press pause if you would first like to read through the criteria for AO1. AO2 and AO3. Here's the question. Explore Dickens's presentation of class in this extract and elsewhere in the novel. In this extract, Magwitch explains what happened during his trial with Compeyson. When we was put in the dock, I noticed first of all what a gentleman Compeyson looked, with his curly hair and his black clothes and his white pocket handkerchief, and what a common sort of a wretch I looked. When the prosecution opened, the evidence was put short aforehand. I noticed how heavy it all bore on me, and how light on him. When the evidence was given the box, I noticed how it was always me that had come forward and could be swore to, how it was always me that the money had been paid to, how it was always me that had seemed to work the thing and get the profit. But when the defence come on, then I see the plan plainer. For, says the counsellor for Compeyson, my lord and gentlemen, here you as afore you, side by side, two persons your eyes can separate wide. One the younger, well brought up, who would be spoke to as such. One the elder, ill brought up, who would be spoke to as such. One the younger, seldom if ever seen in these here transactions, and only suspected. T'other, the elder, always seen in them, and always with his guilt brought home. Can you doubt, if there is but one in it, which is the one, and if there is two in it, which is much the worse one? And such like. When it comes to character, weren't it Compeyson as had been to the school? Weren't it his schoolfellows as was in this position and in that? And weren't it him as had been known by witnesses in such clubs and societies, and now to his disadvantage? And when the verdict come, weren't it Compeyson as was recommended to mercy on account of good character and bad company, and giving up all the information he could again me? And weren't it me as got never a word but guilty? When I says to Compeyson, once out of this court I'll smash that face of yourn, ain't it Compeyson as prays the judge to be protected and gets two turnkeys stood betwixt us? And when we're sentenced, ain't it him as gets 7 year and me 14? And ain't it him as the judge is sorry for, because he might have done so well? And ain't it me as the judge perceives to be an old offender of violent passion, likely to come to worse? He had worked himself into a state of great excitement, but he checked it, took 2 or 3 short breaths, swallowed as often, and stretching out his hand towards me, said in a reassuring manner, I ain't a-going to be low, dear boy. Have a go at writing your own response, but before doing so, plan. Here's how my plan looks. Read it. The video will resume in 5 seconds' time. So here's the question and the first part of the extract. The second part will appear 5 seconds later so that you can toggle between the slides. Press pause to get writing. Here's my response. Great Expectations is a novel which highlights the ludicrousness of viewing people of a higher class as superior. By the end of the novel, Pip has learnt that, in his own way, Joe is a gentle Christian man, in spite of his working class roots, and that he was wrong to elevate the notion of being a gentleman above all else, including the expense of his personal relationships. A great irony of the novel is that Estella, the haughtiest lady, has the humblest roots of all, namely a convict father and, almost certainly, a murderess for a mother, whilst Pip's benefactor is also that same convict. These revelations underline the absurdity of thinking that you are superior to others based on perceived notions of gentility. In this extract, the writer shows the unfair bias within the criminal justice system and society in general against those of a lower class. During the trial of Compeyson and Magwitch, the former's lawyer explicitly declares that the two should be dealt with differently. One, the younger, well brought up, who will be spoke to as such. One, the elder, ill brought up, who will be spoke to as such. Whilst defence lawyers will always use a variety of tactics in order to help their clients, the suggestion that two men need to be spoken to differently within a court of law due to differing backgrounds is terrifying to a modern reader. The use of antithesis pits well brought up against ill brought up, and the inference is clear. Those of a higher class need to be treated with more respect in court, and thus by implication more favourably. The lawyer goes on to pose the following rhetorical question. Can you doubt if there is but one in it, which is the one, and if there is two in it, which is much the worst one? In other words, rather than scrutinise and interrogate facts, the lawyer's view, and by extension the majority within the establishment, is that competent class and background alone mean that he is far less likely to be guilty of any particular crime. It is more probable that he has been led astray by a mere warmint, to quote Magwitch's slightly ironic self-description from earlier in the novel. So in this extract, Dickens shows us that the odds are stacked against those from a lower class, and it is so much harder for them to achieve justice. Another reason for this is the advantages provided by an education for those from a higher class. A still enraged Magwitch describes the way Compeyson is able to hoodwink and fool the judge and jury. And when it comes to speech making, wanted Compeyson as he could speak to him with his face dropping every now and then into his white pocket handkerchief, and with verses in his speech too. The implication behind the present participle dropping, describing the movement of Compeyson's face into his handkerchief, is that he has the composure in court to feign tears and emotion. His education means that he fully understands the language used by all participants, presumably fairly technical and complicated in places, and he will use his taught eloquence to influence proceedings. The suggestion that he uses verses in his speech is both comic and extraordinary. Clearly, poetry should have no place in a court of law, yet it emphasises once again how a superior education and ability to manipulate language can prejudice the justice system. This is confirmed by the fact that the man of a higher class gets 7 years, whilst poor, passionate, disadvantaged Magwitch, whose use of dialect confirms his class within seconds, ends up with 14. Within today's context, class divisions are less explicitly pronounced. Nonetheless, the fact that so many key positions of power within the United Kingdom are currently held by old Etonians, Prime Minister, Archbishop of Canterbury, future King, highlights the fact that education and background continue to provide significant advantages. In other words, Magwitch's furious ancestors may be appearing in court at this very moment. Throughout the novel, Dickens shows that a preoccupation with class and status is unhealthy and frequently destructive. The rapid deterioration of Pip's relationship with father figure Joe is a prime example. Following the former's transformation into a gentleman, in chapter 27 the latter arrives in London to pay his first visit. He is clearly dreadfully ill at ease, and frequently calls Pip Sir, resulting in Pip feeling impatient and out of temper with him. The older, wiser narrator suggests that Joe's words and behaviour heap coals of fire onto his head. The metaphor suggests that Pip feels live, burning shame about the awkwardness of this encounter with Joe, the man who was, after all, the saviour of his childhood and the only person whom he genuinely loved and trusted. The older, wiser narrator knows that if I had been easier with Joe, Joe would have been easier with me. But the younger Pip just feels dreadfully uncomfortable without quite knowing why. However, the reader does know why. This tragic division has arisen because Pip has been seduced by the false allure of becoming a gentleman. In his immature, naive analysis, gentlemen are superior to those from a lower class, thus making it virtually impossible trying to maintain relaxed, intimate personal relationships with those from his past backgrounds. The destructiveness of an unhealthy preoccupation with class is also seen in the presentation of Mrs. Pocket. In chapter 23, Mr. Pocket's frustrations with his wife's deluded obsession with her class are summed up nicely when he blurts out, "Babies are to be nutcracker dead for people's poor grandpapa's positions." This refers to his wife's supposedly higher class family, in which her grandfather could apparently have been made a baronet. This idea infiltrates all of her thinking, resulting in her feeling that she is above basic parenting or having any authority challenged, even if her negligence results in one of her children being at risk of harm, in this case from a nutcracker. Mr. Pocket's frustration is all too evident, as seen in the exasperated, alliterative, repeated P sounds. The implication is that his wife's obsession with past grandeur hasn't just negatively impacted upon her ability to parent, but has also resulted in a fundamentally unsatisfactory marriage devoid of genuine, cooperative communication. In this novel, Dickens shows the importance of appreciating human beings for their morals and values, rather than their class. Herbert and Joe are the two constant, gentle Christian men of the novel. Those, including Pumblechook and various members of the Pocket extended family, who hypocritically reverence those theoretically from a high class, are scorned and mocked. Why does this get full marks for both AQA and OCR? Well, for AO1, I focus sharply on the question and develop my ideas, as I do here when I point out that Mrs. Pocket's deluded sense of superiority impacts not just upon her ability to parent on a basic level, but also her relationship with her hair-raising hubby. I use short, embedded quotations. I show a critical, perceptive understanding of Compson's actions, fueled by the confidence of his social position. His education has turned him into an adroit actor, with the right words to say at the right time at his fingertips. AO2, you need to be very specific and detailed when exploring language, as I am here when exploring the effect of the use of antithesis. I employ subject terminology accurately, as shown in the use of the terms present participle and antithesis. AO3, I make a comparison between a 19th century and a 21st century context in relation to class. We like to think that we are enlightened, but perhaps we may be deceiving ourselves. That's it. I hope it's been useful. Do make a comment within the section below if so. And remember, you can visit any of the other videos shown on screen at any point. The more you keep on thinking about this splendid novel, the better your essay writing will become. Many thanks for watching Schofield on Shakespeare, and good luck.